Moin, ihr wunderbare Menschen des Interwebs. Ich begrüße euch ganz herzlich zurück zu meinem Let's Play von The Great Ace-Attorney Chronicles. Es geht weiter mit der Verhandlung in Ginas Fall. I hereby call this court to order as we resume the trial of Miss Gina Lestrade. Lord von Zieks, have you successfully subpoenaed the witness? Was delivered to the communication station where the man works immediately, my lord. However, the heavy rain was delayed the arrival of his carriage, it would seem. I see. Then let us turn our attention to Inspector Gregson's process of the case heard by the court this morning. The glaring omission of the third bullet in your report is a serious blunder, Inspector. Oh, genau, was ich noch ansprechen wollte, als Gina uns im letzten Part erzählt hat, was wirklich nun passiert ist in der Nacht. Da hat sie auch gesagt, dass sie 2 Schüsse gehört hat. Das heißt, die Kugel, die in der Wand ist, in dem Kalender, diese Kugel, das muss die Kugel von Mr. Winniebank sein. Und wir wissen, dass nur eine Kugel in dem Revolver war von Mr. Winniebank. Das heißt, wenn wir das jetzt irgendwie beweisen können, dass das die Kugel war, dann kann Gina Mr. Winniebank gar nicht umgebracht haben. Weil sie hatte ja die Waffe von Mr. Winniebank dann in der Hand, aber da war ja dann schon keine Kugel mehr drin. Und das müssen wir eben beweisen. Yes, I can only apologize, my lord. And also the defense's chemical analysis of the blood at the scene makes for a compelling argument. I cannot permit such untried methods to be used as evidence in my courtroom. It's a big mistake to cross Hurley and me, a very big mistake. My lord, this opponent witness has just arrived in the building. Thank you, officer. Show him to the stand without delay. Mr. Edgar Benedict. I didn't expect to be crossing paths with him again so soon, and certainly not like this. Thank you for complying with the court's subpoena at such short notice, sir. But of course, my lord, as an upstanding member of London society, it is my pleasure to oblige. Now, kindly state your name and occupation for the record. Ashley Graydon, Communications Officer. Mr. Graydon and I both work at London Central Communication Station. Now, perhaps somebody would kindly explain what all this is about. You were apprised of this situation by the court officer on your way here, I presume? Yes, I was. Something to do with a murder that took place at a pawnbroker's on Baker Street. And some nonsense about me having been there on the night in question. That is the accusation, indeed. This really is beyond a joke, you know? Very well. Without further delay, the court will hear your testimony now, Mr. Graydon. You will respond to the accusation made against you under oath. Gladly, my lord, gladly. Okay. Naturally, I have occasion to make use of pawnbroking services from time to time, but are you seriously suggesting I colluded with these thugs to break into the place on the night of the murder? I have no intention of admitting to such an outrageous accusation, even if third parties here present claim that my blood was found at the scene. Some Scaramouche detectives' homebrewed tincture can hardly be taken as serious evidence. So you deny the accusation completely, do you? I must say, I am dismayed. For the highest court in the land to be swayed by this self-professed detective's toy. It was the will of the jury, and our great British justice system demands that the jury's will is upheld. Then it would seem we have the misfortune of a most inept assembly of bureaus today. By golly! How long am I expected to be detained here? If following the defense's cross-examination your involvement in this matter has not been established, you will be free to leave immediately. Good, then I shall be away in time for afternoon tea, some small consolation at least. Let us not hold up Mr. Graydon any longer than necessary, counsel. Proceed with the cross-examination. So, we meet again, Mr. Egger Benedict. Or is it Mr. Graydon? My apologies, you are... Ryunosuke Naruhodo, defense lawyer. We have met. If you say so, Ashley Graydon. Enchanté. So... I trust we can conclude this quickly. But I'm not holding your fleshy head while we do. Okay, legen wir los. Services from time to time. Okay, ich glaube, das ist nicht so wichtig. But are you seriously suggesting I conclude with these flags to break into the place on the night of the murder? Have you seen these two men before? This pair? No, I don't associate with criminals. Said by a man who introduced himself as Egger Benedict. I would like to know who I have to thank for this. Who made this outlandish accusation against me? The young lawyer there in the black. This is a farce. Whose idea was it to permit an outsider to work in a British court anyway? Well, needless to say, I have no intention of admitting to such an outrageous accusation. Where were you at around 1 in the morning on the night in question, sir? That is past the hour at which I would normally retire. Certainly, I was not in the company of these rapscallions. You're able to prove that. Listen carefully, my learned Nipponese friend, for you appear to be under a gross misapprehension on this point. What do you mean? The witness maintains he was not at the scene of the crime. He has no obligation to prove his absence. If your accusation is that the witness was present at the scene, the obligation lies with you to prove your assertion. You will fulfill that obligation before putting any more unreasonable questions to the witness. Silent victory wiggle. Thanks. What was found at the scene of the crime? There's no question of that. Mr. Sholmes' chemical analysis has positively identified the substance as such. But I'm not the only human to have blood running through my veins, am I? How can you be sure that the blood is mine? It could equally be the blood of one of these two miscreants. Every individual's blood has a slightly different composition, it seems. Mr. Sholmes' chemical is able to differentiate. Spare me this science lesson. Who is this Sholmes character anyway? Oh, I assumed all Londoners would know the name. He's a great, renowned detective. So even you are unable to bring yourself to say great detective? A great detective, you say? Now we're in the realm of fairy tales, are we? Do you have something to say about that, Mr. Skulkin? What, me? No, the Mr. Skulking next to you. Right, I've had it up to here with this. How many times have I got to tell you? Yes, I know, you're not Big Bruv Skulky. Mr. Nash Skulkin. Corblibby, you what? Is it not the case that when Mr. Graydon just spoke, a thought went through your mind? Would you care to share that thought with the court? Me thoughts? I don't have none of them. It must have been him. You what? Mr. Nashkalkin, answer the question, please. What went through your mind when Mr. Graydon just spoke? Nothing, honest, goof, nothing. I was just thinking, if he waves his arm around like that much more, it will open up to the wound again, that's all. What wound? Where he took the bullet, of course. It was only 2 days ago. It ain't gonna be healed up yet. So I was, well, you know, I was worrying for him and... Oh, spells. Mr. Graydon, did you hear that? What? Your comrade is worried about you, it seems. On account of your injured arm. My lord. Yes, Mr. Graydon. I have no idea what these two wretches are talking about. Certainly, I shouldn't be expected to answer anything in relation to their mindless insinuations. We know that someone other than the victim was hit by a bullet at the scene of the crime 2 nights ago. From the height of the bullet hole in the wall, that person was likely hit in the upper arm or thereabouts. Perhaps you would allow a court official to examine your arm, sir. The left arm that you're currently grasping with your right hand as if in pain. No, I refuse. You have shown no evidence whatsoever that links me to these common thieves. Accordingly, I am not obliged to permit any such invasion of my privacy. As I've already said, I'm completely uninvolved in all this. I've never had anything to do with the pawnbrokery where this fellow was killed whatsoever. I take offense at the insinuation that I was in any way involved. You claim to have had nothing whatsoever to do with Mr. Windybank's pawnbrokery. My lord, the defense would like that last statement to be added to Mr. Graydon's formal testimony. Very well, counsel. Continue with your testimony, Mr. Graydon. Okay, the bottom line is I've never had anything to do with the pawnbroking establishment where the man was killed. Never had anything to do with it. You forget that I was there, Mr. Graydon, on the very afternoon on the incident. Obviously, I'm not a complete stranger to the pawnbrokers. I'm currently on the lookout for an armchair to furnish my study. No, you were there to redeem an article. I have no idea what you're talking about. Do you have something to add, Inspector? Come again, Sunshine? You were there too, in fact, weren't you, Inspector, that afternoon? Well, yes, I do remember meeting yourself and the pawnbrokers that afternoon. You, your young Japanese assistant, and the accused were all present, as I recall. And at that time, this witness, Mr. Graydon, was trying to acquire a particular article. Well now... I'm afraid I don't remember too clearly. What? But you must. I'm not going to lie and pretend I remember something that I don't. What's going on here? Rexy showed us a picture before, didn't he? You know, from the cameras that Hurley installed in Winniebanks. Yes, of course. Indeed, and the gentleman pictured bears a striking resemblance to the witness, I must say. Exactly, which proves that Mr. Graydon was in the shop on the afternoon in question. At no point have I denied that fact. I merely entered the shop to peruse the articles on sale and have a word with the broker, nothing more. This makes no sense. I understand why Mr. Graydon might be trying to cover his tracks. But why would Gregson be trying to avoid giving testimony about what happened? That's all he's going to say on the matter, is it? What do you think, Bruno? I think he has no intention of telling us anything. He's well aware that the less he says, the less chance he has of giving himself away. Complete opposite of Hurley then. He seems to think that the more he says, the better. Well, at least I managed to prise a little more information from these witnesses' lips. All thanks to the Skulcom brothers. Yes, they were the key to it after all. So he says he had nothing to do with Windybanks. Well, we know that's not true. Perhaps now would be a good time to have a proper look through the court record. Good idea. You never know what tiny scrap of information could become a valuable weapon. Okay, ich meine, wir haben einen Beweis dafür, dass er dort war. Und zwar die Music Disc ist ja der Beweis eigentlich dafür, dass er anwesend war. Wo ist er denn hier? Ups. A metal disc used to play music in a mechanical music box. The smear of blood on it turned green when analyzed. So, die Music Box Disc, um die ging das, ja? Nur die Frage, ob ich das irgendwie beweisen kann, dass er da war. Bottom line is, I've never had anything to do with the pawnbroking establishment where the man was killed. Okay, und das stimmt aber nicht. Ich versuche das jetzt einfach mal. Ich würde hier sehr, sehr gerne die Music Box Disc vorlegen. Have you ever seen this disc before, Mr. Graydon? Why? Is it supposed to mean something? This disc was, until the day of his murder, in pawn in Mr. Windybank's shop. It was redeemed by the defendant, Miss Gina Lestrade, that afternoon. However, somebody mysteriously appeared to try to take it from her. And that somebody was you, of course, wasn't it, Mr. Graydon? As I have reiterated numerous times now, you are mistaken, that was not me. I've never seen the disc before in my life. It may have escaped your notice, but there is a small smear of blood on the disc. Oh yes, resulting from an operation of the thumb, perhaps? That's right. The surface of the disc is covered in hundreds of tiny metal bumps. In the skirmish to acquire the disc, the thumb of the person who tried to take it suffered minor lacerations. So, while the disc bears the remnants of that skirmish in the form of his smear of blood, the thumb of the person in question must bear the remnants also in the form of a scratch. Good gracious, indeed it must. Mr. Graydon, you refused to allow a court officer to examine your arm before. Are you now going to refuse to allow us to examine your thumb? Because I have no doubt that it bears a small scratch consistent with the smear of blood on this disc. Well. It would seem I underestimated you. What is the meaning of this? So you admit it now? You admit you have a scratch on your thumb from when you attempted to take the disc from the defendant? Order. Well, Mr. Graydon, it would appear there has been something of a misunderstanding here. I did not attempt to take the disc, as you put it. No, quite the reverse. What are you trying to say? It's really quite simple, you see. The disc was mine from the outset. Is there some crime in taking an item that you own of the pawn? It would seem, Mr. Graydon, that in this piece of evidence, my learned friend has established a link between yourself and the incident. Accordingly, you will tell the court everything you know about this disc now. As you wish. Though I'm quite sure it has nothing whatsoever to do with the pawnbroker's murder. There's a note on the disc saying for McGilded, but the item belongs to me. The redemption ticket was stolen from me by the accused, that filthy godderling, on the day in question. I proceeded at once to the shop in order to explain my situation and redeem my article. In the end, of course, the disc was taken by the police. In other words, I had absolutely no reason to break into the shop later the same night. Did I hear you correctly, sir? McGilded, you say? The famous London philanthropist? Who perished in this very courtroom 2 months ago after being acquitted of a distinctly messy murder? Yes, my lord. The one and the same. Good lord, Mr. Graydon, are you saying that Mr. McGilded and yourself were acquainted? Yes, that's correct. I certainly didn't expect to hear that name uttered here in my courtroom again. According to what Gina told us, this disc was placed in pawn on that fateful night 2 months ago. McGilded himself gave instructions to deposit it at Windybanks. It's funny that Mr. Graydon here is claiming that this belongs to him then, isn't it? In all likelihood, he's lying. But he appeared that afternoon at Windybanks in order to get his hands on McGilded's disc for some reason. Counsel, you will commence your cross-examination, please. Okay, there's a note on the disc saying for McGilded, but the item belongs to me. Would you care to explain how this belongs to you? As you will observe, a communications officer such as myself commands a fine salary. You're certainly exquisitely dressed, sir. Though you see, I have little need to make use of the services provided by the pawnbrokery trade. However, I did once find myself in difficulties having misplaced my purse whilst on an errand, which is why I pawned my fine black overcoat to the broker in question. You claim that was your overcoat? Obviously, and in my haste I clean forgot that the music box disc was in its pocket. And yet there is a note on it that reads for McGilded. I am a collector of rare and unusual music box music. I first met Mr. McGilded at a gentleman's club in the city and was interested to discover that he shared my penchant in that area. So the disc in question, it's a pre-production sample. I promised to let Mr. McGilded hear it. But then you forgot that it was in the pocket of the overcoat you were forced to pawn. Yes, exactly. Gina didn't mention any of that in her testimony 2 months ago, did she? No, because McGilded had threatened her to keep her mouth shut, which means that if we dig too deeply here, it's going to expose Gina's perjury. Oh dear, this is complicated, isn't it? Let's leave it alone for the time being. So you're saying that Miss Lestrade lifted the ticket from your pocket or back? That's right, despite being mindful of danger when walking in the insalubrious areas her kind frequents. Miss Lestrade did no such thing. Well, of course you would take that stance, but the girl is a regular offender. You came to the pawnbrokery that day, prepared with all the information you needed to identify the defendant. You were looking for her, that's what brought you to Windybanks. To get your hands on Mr. McGilded's disc. My learned friend is a veritable font of nonsense. Nonsense? I concur with the prosecution. Counsel, you will refrain from conjecturing in this way, is it clear? Yes, my lord. Then I will continue with my testimony for what possible use it can be. Had you ever been to Windybanks before? Only once, for the purposes of pawning something, but like many, I enjoy browsing in such establishments. So when you noticed that the pickpocket had taken your ticket, you chased after her, is that correct? Yes, that's right. I didn't notice at first, of course, such is the art of the pig purse. But when I did, I headed to the pawnbrokery at once in order to reclaim my coat before the thief could. I was merely trying to recover what was rightfully mine in the first place. He can say what he likes because he knows we have no evidence to contradict him on this. Yes, it was taken by Inspector Gregson here, wasn't it? That's right, this was the very man. Apparently the police are collecting anything that has connection with Mr. McGilded as evidence. Is something wrong, Inspector? Oh, well, what do you mean? The last remark Mr. Graydon made in his testimony seemed to trouble you in some way. Oh, no it didn't. It's nothing. Leave it alone. Let me ask you this, Inspector. Why is Scotland Yard gathering Mr. McGilder's possessions? I can't tell you something like that, Sunshine. What is it, Inspector? Investigative secrets? Yes, exactly. You should know all about that. Magnus McGilded, who died so unexpectedly after his trial 2 months ago, a man renowned throughout the capital for his great contributions to public life, yet he had a dark side too. Where are you going with this, Fonzies? I suppose the police are dealing with the aftermath of his nefarious activities, are they? That's enough. Coppers like me have duties to carry out that we are not at liberty to talk about. That's all you need to know. Duties conferred by Lord Stronghold, I presume. The Lord Chief Justice appears to have great faith in you, Inspector. The bottom line is, if you want to get more out of me, you're gonna need Lord Stronghold's paw print first. What's all this about? It's like there's something going on between Gregson and Lord von Zix here. Well, it would appear that the Inspector has revealed all he is at liberty to reveal. Mr. Graydon, let us return to your testimony. Gladly, my lord. In other words, I had absolutely no reason to break into the shop later that same night. But perhaps you had seen something of value among the forfeited items? No, not at all. Oh. A valuer was brought in by the police to assess everything in the shop. Without exception, every article on the shelves was common or garden bric-a-brac. In that case, it's clear that you broke into the shop later that day in order to recover Mr. McGilded's disc. Have you not been listening, man? Even if I had wanted to recover the disc, you may recall that it had been seized by the police that afternoon. It was nowhere in the shop that night. Then as I keep saying, I simply had no reason to break in. So there was nothing of McGilded's left in the shop that night. Nothing this man might have been after. I wonder if that's really true. Oh, if you have some evidence, then let him have it. I'm dying to see that irritatingly assertive expression of his crumble. Ich glaube tatsächlich, dass wir einen Beweis haben. McGilded slipped the disc into his coat pocket and had it deposited at Windybank's. Then, when he realized he was going to be arrested on the suspicion of the omnibus murder, he threatened Gina and forced her to take the redemption ticket. There's no doubt about it, that witness is lying through his pearly white teeth. The police were obviously after anything left behind by McGilded as well. That's why Inspector Gregson ended up taking the disc into custody that day. But Grexy being very strange about all this. There must be a reason for that, I'm sure. I just don't know what it is. For now, I need to focus on exposing the fact that Mr. Graydon is lying in his testimony. Es gibt noch einen Teil McGilded beim Pfandleiher war. Und zwar, wo ist es? Code Box, und zwar die Box. A redemption ticket issued from the pawnbrokery owned by the victim, Mr. Windybank, in the form of some handwritten notes on the back of a photograph. Und diese Box gehört auch Mr. McGilded. Und diese Box hatten wir ja nicht mehr gefunden, weil es ist schon ausgelaufen. Und die Box musste dann eigentlich irgendwo vorne im Laden schon ausgestellt sein. This disc was deposited at Windybank's on Magnus McGilded instructions. You knew that, and you went there with the intention of obtaining it for yourself. Conjecture again, and in any case, the disc was taken into custody by the police that afternoon. The witness had no reason to visit the pawnbrokery again that night. Sorry, my learned friend, but that's not true. What? Mr. McGilded had another article in pawn at Winniebank's, as this second pawnbroker's ticket proves. There were 2 articles belonging to Mr. McGilded in Winniebank's pawnbrokery, and the reason you broke into the shop that night was to recover the second one. Together with your 2 accomplices, the Skulkin brothers. This is the second ticket, is it? What had the man deposited it? The article description reads 1 small box. A rather vague description, it seems to me. Are you suggesting that I broke into the pawnbrokery with these clowns in order to steal some trinket box? I believe there are okay grounds to suspect that you did. This is absurd. Why on earth would I do such a thing? Once the article had been forfeited, I could simply walk into the shop and purchase it. There would be absolutely no need for me to resort to theft. That's a good point. Indeed, the witness makes a solid argument. So that means that for some reason, this Graydon fellow needed the small box that very night, does it? It's time to put an end to this nonsense, my lord. Could you be a little less cryptic, Lord von Zieks? I do hate to ruin my learned friend's argument, but the truth is quite incontrovertible. On the night in question, no small box was taken from Winniebank's pawnbrokery. And rest assured, the prosecution can prove it. What? Good gracious. Inspector, show the photographic prints to the court, if you please. Yes, sir. What prints? These prints were taken from one of the detective's security cameras. Hurley's red-handed recorders again. As previously explained, using this plan of the shop layout. The victim's establishment was furnished with automatic cameras in 2 locations. One was set to capture the counter where Mr. Winniebank received his customers, and the other was set to capture the shelves on which articles were placed for sale once forfeited. According to the information on the ticket, McGilded's small box had been forfeited already, 2 days before the incident at 9 PM on 13th April to be precise, which means it would have been on the shelves of forfeited items in the shop front. Now, what I have here is a print taken by one of the cameras about 2 hours before the incident. That's at 11 PM on 15th April. The victim certainly had a very full shop, it would appear. And then here we have another print. This one was taken about 2 hours after the incident. I see, so we have 2 pictures to compare. So I must say that placing them side by side leaves me cold. Ja, aber ich glaube, wenn wir durch das Stereoskop gucken, sollten wir dort mehr sehen können. Ich verstehe auch immer noch nicht, warum McGilded so wichtig ist. Warum will denn jeder jetzt seine Sachen haben? Was ist so wichtig daran? Das verstehe ich alles nicht. Hear me, that's starting to make my head ache. Obviously, at Scotland Yard we considered theft as one possible motive in this case. We explored the possibilities that something had been taken in addition to the victim's life. So your men have already compared these 2 prints so thoroughly, Inspector? Yes, sir. We counted every single item in each of these 2 photographic prints. And the Yard's conclusion is that exactly the same number are present in both. In other words, nothing was taken from the pawnbrokery on the night in question, and my learned friend's assertion is nothing more than a hopeful fantasy. I don't believe it. If I could have just shown that he'd stolen McGilded's pawned box. I might have been able to break him down at last. You know what, Runo? I've been thinking. I wonder if these 2 photographs really are exactly the same. What? So, counsel, in the light of the evidence put forward by the prosecution, what is your position? It seems that in fact, on the night in question, nothing was stolen from the victim's establishment. Okay, bevor wir das weitermachen, kann ich hier irgendwie Fotos mir angucken? You have to pop your 2 prints in here to start with, you see? And then when you look through the eyepieces, you can see the image in 3 dimensions. The important thing to get right is the position of the 2 prints. I don't know who came up with the idea of a stereoscope, but it's really quite fascinating. Kann ich das irgendwie benutzen? Oh, look at that. It's totally changed shape, just from one little button press. Well, that is what the button's for, Runo. You're just like Hurley. You boys love pressing buttons, don't you? Especially if you don't know what they do. Us boys? Says the 10-year-old girl. Anyway, now you can see that it really is a stereoscope, can't you? Ja, aber kann ich das nicht benutzen? Ich würde es gerne benutzen. Okay. Do you accept the prosecution's assertion? I don't know. Could there be some hidden discrepancy in these 2 photographic prints somewhere? Könnte, aber ich kann sie mir jetzt nicht angucken. Das ist ja das Problem. Was ich machen könnte, ist einen Beweis vorlegen und dann eben das Stereoskop als Beweis vorlegen. Dass man sagt, okay, man guckt sich die Bilder nochmal damit an. Das ist das Einzige, was ich jetzt machen kann. Before I give my answer, my lord, I would like to try something, if I may. Try something? What do you mean, counsel? I will need to use a certain piece of evidence from the court record to identify the discrepancy. I'm not entirely sure I follow. Which piece of evidence do you intend to use to help you identify a discrepancy between the 2 prints? So, und jetzt hier würde ich dann eben das Stereoskop vorzeigen. I would like to use this device, my lord, to view the 2 prints stereoscopically. Yes, you've caught the bug at last. You can't resist it, can you? You've got the cross-eyed compulsion. Juror number 3, what a surprise. Come on, Bruno. Ich hab das Wort übrigens falsch ausgesprochen. Let's put the pictures in place and see what this wonderful contraption shows us. There we go. Now look through the eyepiece. I wasn't sure at first, but there is a clear discrepancy between these 2 prints. You must identify the location in question for the court, counsel. Indicate the precise location of the discrepancy of which you speak. Das ist hier. Granted, these 2 prints are almost identical. However, there is one minor discrepancy between them. When you view the 2 pictures stereoscopically, sollte mir das Wort unbedingt einmal genauer angucken. A single area stands out as being different, the location of this small box. Unbelievable. Wait, Jove, you're right, how extraordinary. Richter. What this tells us is very simple. Mr. McGilder's small box was indeed not stolen from Winniebank's on the night in question. However, there can be no doubt that somebody picked up this particular box and then returned it to its place on the shelves. Are you suggesting that the small box originally deposited by Mr. McGilder is in fact, yes, the very same small box I just identified in those photographic prints? Mindless guesswork. What if it was? So a box was moved on the shelf. Nothing was stolen. Which means quite simply that nothing has changed. Aber wir wissen noch gar nicht, ob der Inhalt der Box weg ist. That may be true, but... Alright, McGiller's box wasn't stolen then. But doesn't the fact that it was moved like that change things? Yeah, it changes everything. I believe this changes everything about the case. How can that possibly be? The crucial point is the fact that what was moved was a small box. In other words, we have to consider what might have been inside the box. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that we need to examine that box as soon as possible. A vital piece of evidence is sitting on the shelves at Winniebanks as we speak. That won't be necessary. Some little box belonging to a man who died 2 months ago can't possibly be relevant to this trial. The court does not uphold your objection, Lord von Zieks. By leave, arrange for an officer to go to Baker Street at once, obtain the small box in question, and bring it back here for further examination. We should have a report within half an hour. I think perhaps we should recess for a short while until the evidence is brought forth. To be hoodwinked by such a farce, huh? Disappointing. I beg your pardon, Lord von Zieks. This is nothing but a smokescreen. An Japanese speciality, it would seem. What are you trying to say? My learned friend has persisted with the same line of reasoning from the very beginning, that this witness's intent was to steal an article belonging to Mr. McGilded from the pawnbrokery. Yet, common sense tells us that none of the articles have value enough to be worth stealing in the first place. Exactly. It would be beyond absurd to break into a place for the purpose of stealing such commonplace property. If your lordship recalls, Mr. McGilded perished 2 months ago immediately after the conclusion of his trial. A trial in which he was found not guilty, a trial in which it was established he was the upstanding member of society, his reputation implied in fact. So I propose a toast to my learned friend and his most insightful defense. The articles this upstanding member of society pawned were entirely ordinary. A black overcoat that just happened to have a music box disc in one of its pockets and a small box. I assure you, I wouldn't accept even if the man tried to make a gift of such things to me. Ach so, ich dachte eigentlich, dass das dein Mantel ist. Interesting. Also ist das jetzt doch der Mantel von McGilded? The prosecution's argument is undeniably compelling. It is incumbent on the defense now to bolster its argument. To explain what possible significance these commonplace articles pawned by this fine citizen could have. Well, counsel, is your argument in fact demonstrable? Are you able to show proof that the disc or the box are in any tangible way related to this case? Well, what's the matter, Runo? We know that they are related, don't we? They are both vital pieces of evidence. Yes, of course. You and I both know that. We know McGilded's true character, and we know the disc is significant, even if we don't know why. But if we explain all that to the court at this point, we will have to acknowledge that McGilded's acquittal 2 months ago was a mistake, that the defense's argument was flawed, based on false information. And that would mean admitting that Gina committed perjury. But Ginny... Could it be that von Zieks knows? Is that why he's doing this now? Because he anticipated everything? But maybe... This could be a great opportunity for us. Sorry, what do you mean, Iris? Well, what is it that you always say, Runo? Sooner or later, the truth comes out, every time. Alright, the exact significance of the things that Matilda deposited with Mr. Windybank is something that only Gina can explain to the court. But if I put her on the stand to testify about that, it could critically damage our chances of winning this case. What's the right thing to do here? Naja, aber wenn wir... Ich glaube aber, dass trotzdem der einzige Weg ist, Gina aussagen zu lassen, oder? Ich glaube nicht wirklich, dass wir eine andere Wahl haben. My lord, the defense would like to make a proposal. What proposal, counsel? While the court awaits the arrival of Mr. McGilder's small box, I would like to call the defendant, Miss Gina Lestrade, to the witness stand. The defendant? Who wouldn't? It's to do with the various articles deposited at Windybanks by Mr. McGilder, my lord. Miss Lestrade has information relating to them. I believe it would be beneficial for the court to hear what she has to say. It will prove the significance of the articles in question once and for all. Well, things are becoming interesting. I presume you've considered the implications of the testimony you're proposing? In particular, the impact it will have on the accused's standing and indeed your own. I have. Lord von Zieks, would you care to explain that last remark? The prosecution accepts the defense's proposal. I move to interrupt the cross-examination of the current witness and hear from the accused herself. Very well, if you have no objection. So, the court will now hear the testimony of the defendant, Miss Gina Lestrade. You witnesses currently in the stand may step down until further notice. Then I shall bid you good day. Wait. You, sir, shall remain in the stand while Miss Lestrade testifies. As you wish. Alright then, Gina, it's time. I know this will be hard, but please, put your faith in me here. Good luck, Runo.